We thank you for making the time to listen to The Productivity Paradox Output versus Effort, episode number 3, a mini-series from EAQ and Associates presenting Human Capital Intelligence audio podcast to better understand the most effective ways to maximize human capital resources and how an organization can enhance performance, engagement, productivity, and deliver desired outcomes by creating alignment between management and their employees. Welcome to The Debate.
It is fantastic to be here, especially, to dive into these realities that are just hitting every single modern workplace right now.
Yeah, we really need to unpack a crisis that, by this point in March 2026, has completely consumed the professional experience. We are talking about work slop. It's a devastating cycle of severe digital friction where we find ourselves in an frankly absurd loop. Employees are using artificial intelligence to summarize emails and reports that they were only generated in the first place because AI made it effortless to write them.
Right. We're just passing AI-generated noise back and forth.
Exactly. And this endless cycle of low-value content has left 80% of our workforce feeling completely trapped in a race they simply cannot win.
And it's crucial to mention right up front that our discussion today is deeply informed by the core principles of the Human Capital Intelligence Program. To really frame this right, we have to acknowledge the architect behind these frameworks, the program's instructor, Ernest Goss. He is a human resources practitioner, an executive coach, and a Six Sigma Black Belt. He's worked extensively with organized labor and executive leadership teams, always focused heavily on driving actual outcomes for organizations.
Yes, absolutely. Relying on that analytical framework, we need to answer the central question of today's discourse. When we talk about building the bridge to the issue, partnering for a fair exchange, what is the true catalyst for solving this modern productivity paradox? Is the real driver the employer making a structural shift to fundamentally redefine performance metrics? Or is it the employee applying radical process transparency from the bottom up? I'm arguing that the employer's structural transition to what we call contextual integration, essentially redefining what successful effort looks like, has to be the primary driver.
And my position is that this bridge is fundamentally built from the ground up. It relies entirely on the employee providing radical process transparency. The employer can't fix what they can't see, and employees are the ones navigating flawed AI data and exposing systemic breakdowns on the front lines.
So to really grasp why this structural shift from the top is necessary, we have to look back at the architectural failures from the last 2 years. Think back to the capacity gap of 2024 and 2025.
Oh yeah, that was brutal.
It really was. During that period, we saw a staggering divide. 53% of leaders were pushing relentlessly for increased productivity and output, while 80% of the global workforce reported they simply lacked the time or energy to do their jobs. We had employees getting interrupted every 2 minutes by meetings, emails, and just constant pings. The structural failure was that management defaulted to rewarding the easy win, the visible, measurable outcome, while totally ignoring the systemic walls their employees were hitting. That's the output illusion. And it birthed the Great Detachment, where engagement just bottomed out to a 10-year low.
You're completely right about the pain of that period, but looking at it as just a top-down management failure misses the lived reality of the workers. You mentioned those constant interruptions. That fragmentation of the employee experience is exactly why top-down edicts don't work. Think about the typical knowledge worker today. They are lucky to get even 3 hours of actual focused deep work done during standard business hours. That relentless fragmentation created the triple peak workday,
which is a devastating metric for work-life balance.
Devastating. We have an enormous portion of the workforce being forced to put their kids to bed and log back on at 10 p.m. just to find the quiet focus they were denied at 2 p.m. Workers aren't necessarily asking for less work. They're desperate to reclaim their human advantage. The true value in this fair exchange comes from the employee using uniquely human judgment to make sense of the almost right AI data flooding our systems. Without the employee stepping forward and providing radical transparency about what's broken, any metric change by an employer is just rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship.
But relying on the employee to just speak up completely underestimates how complex these enterprise systems actually are. You can't fix an architectural failure with a suggestion box. To understand the modern digital friction of 2026, we have to recognize this is a historical pattern of management failure. Let's look at 1987.
Okay, taking us back?
Yeah, because economist Robert Solow famously observed that you could see the computer age everywhere except in the productivity statistics. Do you remember why economic historian Paul David said that happened?
Yes, his lags theory. The steam engine analogy.
Exactly. In the early days of electrification, factory owners didn't redesign their factories. They just took a massive electric motor and strapped it onto the old steam engine setups using the exact same belts and pulleys. They gained zero efficiency. That is precisely what employers are doing today. They are committing the same mismanagement by strapping generative AI onto broken, legacy workflows. Researchers call this the adaptive lag trap. The technology advances, but the organizational structure is stuck in the past. You end up with a highly automated, incredibly expensive, entirely broken process. The change has to be driven by the employer obliterating old workflows, not just asking employees to transparently navigate the broken ones.
Look, I completely agree with the steam engine analogy, but let's talk about how these efficiency gains actually manifest on the ground, because it flips your argument. Look at the introduction of the ATM in the banking sector. It was a massive quality improvement. Suddenly, a customer could get cash at 10 p.m. on a Sunday instead of waiting for a teller at 8:30 a.m. on Monday. But did that massive leap in utility show up in GDP statistics? No. It was practically invisible in the official output data. I bring this up because we are seeing a modern equivalent with work slop, but it's the Jevons paradox of attention.
The Jevons paradox being the coal engine effect, right?
Right. Back in the 19th century, when coal engines became more efficient, we didn't use less coal. We just built more engines and used way more coal. The exact same thing is happening with our attention today. AI made writing emails and generating reports incredibly efficient. So the rebound effect is that we simply flood each other with 10 times as many low-value tasks. That's work-a-slop in a nutshell. No employer mandate, no top-down workflow redesign can fix the granular reality of attention consumption. Only the employees operating on the front lines know exactly where this digital busy work is leaking productivity. They're the only ones who can identify the friction points.
But employees don't have the authority to unilaterally change enterprise software or eliminate reporting structures. This is why leadership is facing a severe growth efficiency paradox today. They are under immense pressure to fuel massive growth, but they've finally realized that prematurely cutting human headcount in anticipation of AI gains is a critical risk. To survive this, the employer has to establish what's called stagility.
Stagility meaning stability and agility working together?
Exactly. Creating stability for workers so the broader organization can pivot and move at the speed of light. An employee cannot provide that stability for themselves. It has to be structurally mandated by the employer, setting the rules of the game and providing a clear human value proposition. Let me give you a real-world example of the psychological damage done when employers don't do this. Think about the 2025 crisis. You have an employee who works until 2 a.m. to save a project, but the project ultimately fails because a critical outside vendor collapses. Management's response, based purely on the output illusion, is a cold, automated email asking why didn't this work?
Yeah, that's just crushing.
It entirely erases the employee's humanity. It is the employer's fundamental responsibility to structurally change the metrics of the exchange, moving away from outcomes-only management so that the employee's persistence and effort are validated.
I don't disagree that the cold email erases their humanity. The environment was incredibly toxic. We saw life evaluations hit record lows, and only about 21% of employees strongly agreed that their organization actually cared about their overall well-being. But an employer simply declaring a new human value proposition from the C-suite doesn't rebuild trust. How does the employer even know why the vendor failed without the employee? The solution requires the employee's active participation through radical process transparency.
But the employer has to create the safe space for that transparency first.
The space doesn't matter if the employee doesn't bring the context. When employees involve themselves in shaping the metrics, when they provide the context behind the quantitative data, the organization receives information that our material explicitly states has twice the impact of quantitative data alone. Management cannot fix the hardware of the company unless the employee tells them why the external systems are failing. If the employee doesn't step out of the shadows and say, hey, This AI summary is almost right, but it's fundamentally flawed because of variable X. The employer is flying completely blind. The bridge is built on context that only the employee possesses.
You're arguing for a grassroots movement to fix enterprise architecture, and that just doesn't scale. We cannot rely on organic, bottom-up transparency to fix systemic failures. This is exactly why we need to look at structured frameworks and lean into the Human Capital Intelligence Program. If you look at the methodology HR architect Ernest Goss uses, and remember, as an HR practitioner, he has worked directly with frontline employees, organized labor, managers, and executive leadership teams focused on outcomes for organizations. He utilizes Six Sigma and data-driven architecture to solve these massive, complex organizational problems.
Right. Bringing a very rigorous, measured approach to human capital.
Exactly. Applying that level of rigorous methodology, the employer must actively target the friction-filled moments. They have to measure and optimize effort, not just output. When an employer explicitly designs an architectural system to eliminate meeting overload and digital busy work, the data shows they can achieve up to a 35% productivity increase. That translates to an additional 2.8 hours of productive work a day and over $47,000 in extra revenue per employee annually. An employee cannot orchestrate the 35% enterprise-wide gain from their desk. It absolutely requires executive architecture and the kind of Six Sigma precision that Ernest Goss advocates for.
I completely acknowledge the rigorous methodology of a Six Sigma approach, and hitting $47,000 in extra revenue per employee is a phenomenal metric. But I question how you actually reach that 35% gain in reality. Those gains are absolutely impossible to realize unless the employee feels they are more than just a line item of human capital. The engine of that 35% increase is what the research calls total contribution.
And you're defining total contribution as what exactly?
It's the maximum discretionary effort. Total contribution only happens when the employee's grit, their creativity, and their process expertise are fully engaged. You cannot command total contribution through an architectural framework alone. An executive can't just mandate that an employee care more. It requires the employee's willingness to stop being a passive recipient of work's law. The employee must choose to actively rewrite the system. They have to navigate a fragmented workspace, manage their triple peak schedule, and willingly offer up their uniquely human judgment. The employer can build the most elegant Six Sigma process in the world, but if the employee is detached, if they calculate their willingness to commit that discretionary effort and find the math doesn't add up, the architecture collapses. The employee's transparency is the lifeblood of the entire system.
That is a very fair point regarding the absolute necessity of employee buy-in. An architectural framework without human adoption is just a dead schematic. But as we synthesize these arguments and look at the fair exchange, I still maintain that the foundation rests on the employer's structural pivot. Let's look at what the employer actually gains here. By formalizing contextual integration and defining successful effort, what the employer gains is stable dynamics. They gain a highly agile workforce that is actually willing to take on the hard, complex, risky projects. Why? Because the employees know their persistence and expertise are valued by leadership, regardless of whether an external vendor fails or an AI hallucination derails the final output. This creates a workforce that fundamentally trusts its leadership. Without the employer taking that crucial first step to tear down the output illusion, the employee remains permanently trapped in the cycle of digital friction. The employer's design is what protects the human attention required to achieve those gains.
And while I appreciate the focus on stable dynamics from an organizational perspective, I have to emphasize what the employee gains in this exchange, because I believe that is the true measure of resolving the productivity paradox. By stepping up and providing radical process transparency, what the employee gains is profound. It's psychological safety.
Right, which is so rare right now.
Exactly. They gain the ability to tackle those complex, high-risk issues without the paralyzing fear that an external bad result, something entirely beyond their control, means they are going to be labeled a bad employee. When they provide context, they receive meaningful feedback in return. They get the slack needed to actually master these new tools rather than just drowning in them. This allows them to step out of the grind of merely generating and summarizing AI text. They are finally potentialized. They can thrive not just in their specific daily task, but in their careers and lives overall. It is this psychological safety that restores their humanity in the face of relentless technological pressure.
I think we've uncovered some critical layers here today. As we reflect on the state of the workplace in 2026, it is undeniably clear that the productivity paradox is no longer just a theoretical headline from a couple of years ago. It is literally the air we breathe in the office every single day.
I agree entirely. The era of the output illusion has forced a massive reckoning for both management and workers. Whether you view the solution as being driven primarily by employer-designed contextual integration or by the employee's radical process transparency, the ultimate goal remains exactly the same. We have to protect human attention and elevate the human advantage in an increasingly noisy digital world. There is clearly much more to explore in this material as organizations continue to navigate these profound shifts.
Thank everyone for joining our 3-part mini-series, Human Capital Intelligence Series, presented by EAQ and Associates. We will continue to explore the intersection between business problems, operations, and strategy. HR architect Ernest Gaussuz uses Six Sigma and data-driven architecture to solve complex organizational problems. We invite you to visit their website at eaqassociates.com. Join us for episode number 4. We will be discussing resistance to change, the not my job barrier, in our next session. Our goal is to equip you with the tools to turn your human capital into a sustainable competitive advantage and build the bridge that sustains a viable organization while creating opportunities for its employees. We'll see you next time.